Hello everyone, and welcome back to this month's video. This month I'm going to be reviewing the RWBY book After the Fall, so there will be spoilers for this as well. I purchased the book back in early 2020, right after the end of RWBY Volume 7. I didn't really read it until we went to our trip to California. I kind of needed something to do on the plane, so I was like, well, I'll just bring the book along and read it. And I pretty much read 85% of the book on the way over to California. And then the other small portion was when we were just like chilling in one of the hotel rooms at the time. So I managed to finish the book and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was so well done. I was having trouble reading it because I was like trying to picture what was going on because, you know, RWBY's an animated show by Rooster Teeth, which is, by the way, not sponsored. I'm just a fan reviewing parts of the book, highlights of the book that I enjoyed as well. So I'm not going to be going through the whole plot. You should buy the book. Then you'll figure it out. But just some little bits and pieces there. So, but at first it was hard to read because it was just like I was trying to envision like the fight scenes and the different characters and creatures of Grimm, because there were some new ones because now we're in Vacuo. So it was just really trying to get over that. So, but I finally managed to get through reading it. So I will also indicate that there will be RWBY Volume 8 spoilers. So if you haven't caught up to RWBY Volume 8, which you totally should, it's amazing, then you might want to watch that, read this book again. So this is RWBY After the Fall. It's written by E.C. Myers, and the story is by Carrie Shawcross and Miles Luna, so they're part of the RWBY team. So I'm going to dive right into just some random highlights that I really enjoyed and have several thousand questions about, I feel like Nora would say. Alright, so towards the beginning of the first chapter, it's Team Coffee, so Coco Adele, Fox Alistair, Velvet Scarlatina, and Yatsu as well. I can never pronounce his name, I'm so sorry. But it's a pretty long and hard name to pronounce. But they're on their way to like a little village to eat some food. And it's so funny because as they're sitting there like ordering, you know, Vacuo has this thing about like don't trust strangers and all this stuff. Coco orders coffee, of course, and a burger. So I thought it was kind of funny because while we were in California, I brought my Coco Adele cosplay, so I got to cosplay the queen herself, and we went out to the desert. And before we went out there, we stopped at a little town to grab a bite to eat. And I was like, oh, it'd be so funny if I got a burger, and then it wasn't made out of crab meat, or crab mole meat, which was what this burger was made of. So thought I'd point that out there. Another interesting part was at some point the team gets like really emotional and upset, and this is like not like one of the top teams, but at least for Beacon, when they attended Beacon Academy, you know, Team Coffee was like very looked up to and respected, and with their input and whatnot. So the fact that, you know, towards like still in the beginning portion of the book, you know, Coco starts like yelling and feels like anger, and she's like taking it out on her teammates, and it's just like, whoa, like that's not our Coco, you know, who stays like cool under pressure and all this stuff. So that's when you start like kind of, at least for me, I started speculating like something's off. Maybe somebody has like a semblance, you know, it's kind of like your superpower or a connection or something. So there's also a flashback. So there's like different chapters that start with like a character silhouette, but then there's like the Tower of Beacon Academy, and that's when it'll be like a flashback scene to like their days at Beacon, Team Coffee's days at Beacon. So there's actually a point where I guess Ozpin really likes that flying students off the edge of a cliff technique and then go into a forest filled with Grimm and, you know, collect I think they did do like cards, like a deck of cards, whereas like in RWBY Volume 1 it's the chess pieces. So they had to do that, and then that's how they would decide their partners and teammates. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what we do in the RWBY universe. So, you know, pretty much Velvet had the same reaction as RWBY, as like, what, today? We gotta find teammates today? Like, what's going on here? So, and she wants to have Coco because her and Coco went to the same academy before attending Beacon, but she ends up with Yatsu, and Coco ends up with Fox. So, and there's also somebody who I follow on Instagram, Alvian, I believe, Allie. She actually did an animation series of like when Team Coffee was like first meeting and everything. So I thought that was like really cool. You should totally check it out. This is where RWBY Volume 8 spoilers are going to come in, because while I was reading, it says, you know, Fox envied Fox's complete awareness of his body and how it moved in his environment. 4 people just left that area in a hurry, heading back to the cliff, Fox said. How do you know that? Coco asked. I can detect other people's minds, just an impression of their consciousness, and then he falls silent. So in RWBY Volume 8, most of us know that Ren leveled up in his semblance. So I should have watched this beforehand, but he did something along the same lines where he could like sense people's presence or something to that effect. I feel like there's still more that needs to be talked about with that. So yes, where the questions start, because like Fox can detect like people's state of mind, like whether they feel sad or angry or something, and then like he can kind of pinpoint that location a bit. Ren's still working on his, so he kind of just gets a sense of like where people are based on like their aura or something like that. So I think it would be really, really cool if, you know, the teams do finally meet up in Vacuo, that, you know, Ren's on one team, Fox is on the other team, so they're able to find like people or Grimm or something like that. Like, that's what I'm at least hoping for. This next part, not so serious, but I thought it was adorable when Velvet and Yatsu were trying to go around and they're interviewing people about what's been going on, and you know, Velvet's taking pictures of people, I guess, for something that's going on. And at one point there's like a little kid crying, and Yatsu stands behind Velvet and does like the bunny ears. You know, like people do the bunny ears, even though she has bunny ears, obviously. When I read that, I couldn't stop like grinning. I was like, oh my gosh. This big, tough guy standing behind like little petite Velvet, like, hey. And it got the kid to smile and laugh. So even though Velvet was like, what are you doing? He's like, nothing. Can totally see it going down. In another Beacon Academy flashback, Coco Adele is talking with RWBY about, like, you know, what is leadership? What does it mean? Coco gives her advice that Professor Ozpin actually gave to her when she first started at Beacon, and it kind of just goes along the same lines of, like, you know, what do you do? How do you train? It's more along the lines, I think the word was like randomness or something like that, where it's like, you know, sometimes you gotta be flexible, like, you know, you go in with like a plan, but then it's like think of like 12 other backup plans, which Team RWBY doesn't really think of a whole lot sometimes. I'm sorry, but it's partially true. So, you know, it's just this part of, you know, like, what does it mean to be a leader? Like, what do you do with that? So, and the other thing too she mentions is like Professor Ozpin's gonna be talking to RWBY, Team RWBY a lot, and it's like, within that same chapter, there's also Velvet, who's making her way towards Blake, who is reading a book, obviously, because it's Blake, entitled The Boy Who Fell from the Sky. And if you've seen RWBY Volume 8, you'll know that Jean is the only male that fell through the portal. So I'm wondering if there's going to be some significance with that, or if it was just lucky guess. And then that chapter, you know, based on everything that's going on, like what's going on, it ends with Blake, Yang, and Velvet cheering themselves with some beverages, and Velvet says to new friendships, which was absolutely wholesome. So back to the scary stuff, and that is Yatsu's semblance is finally explained, and it's very horrifying to think that you know, it'd start as like a prank, like, you know, forgetting, you know, maybe getting one allowance and then making the person to forget, so you get like a second allowance or something. But, you know, the fact that he made his mother forget that she had a daughter to take care of, and then he had to take that responsibility until his mother remembered. It was very, very scary to read all that and just be like, oh my gosh, this dude could just wipe out memories without even knowing, you know, or even knowing when they'll come back or if they come back. So I always perceived him as like a gentle giant who was just interested in fighting, and I thought he'd have more of a fighting semblance, like something, you know, do with like a sword or something, you know, but instead it's like, you know, he can tamper with the mental state, so to speak. So I feel like in some instances maybe that's good. Maybe if like Grimm, that's another good question. If Grimm have like a mental state or consciousness, you can like make them forget that they did something or alter their mind. But like people and humans, that's like totally other subject. So it made me soften my heart just a bit more for him, and just wanting to make sure that, you know, he's working on it, which is good. Like through meditation, I see him and Ren just like meditating. You know, Ren's trying to gather his sense, even though him and Fox have similar. And then I don't know, the whole Team RWBY, Team Junior, Team Coffee, everybody coming together and figuring out what's going on with their semblances. It's going to be a big surprise, which could make for very interesting volume, I feel. Later on, like several chapters later, Yatsu's explaining his semblance to Coco about when he first used it and how terrified he felt. Coco plays the empathy card and says, like, that must have been hard, you know, is that why you don't use your semblance? And he's like, yeah, like, you know, I'm still working on it and everything. So I really felt for those two. I have such a new love and appreciation for Team Coffee. I've always have. I mean, I've even done an interview, like, as Coco Adele and everything, but reading this book really made me feel so much, like, closer to this team and whatnot. So, but still, not as good as Team Juniper, I will say, but they're second. Okay, so a different Beacon Academy chapter, which I believe took place when the Volume 2 dance was going on, where Team Coffee was like called away, and then, you know, Yang had to set up the dance and whatnot. So during that time, they actually explain what happened with Team Coffee and what was going on. So I'm assuming they got a mission to go to a place in Vale to help clear out some Grimm. And I was just like, oh, okay, like some fighting, you know, get to see some things. It's a lot darker than that. I was not expecting, you know, just the confliction that they were all facing at that time, you know, between, like, you know, do we stay here, you know, try to get every person out, or is it, you know, do we leave, like, you know, do we call in for more reinforcements? It's just like that, like, split second, like, go, and to be so young and still kind of newish in the field, even though they had Professor Poor with them, I was just like, wow, like, this is the real deal. This is what they've been dealing with. And I mean, they still were, like, in the desert and everything, but the fact that they did this flashback of, like, when they first were all so scared and uncertain of what was going to happen and what to do and what was the right thing to do, because apparently that's, like, another theme in RWBY is figuring out, like, the right thing and who's doing the right thing. So it's the fact that, you know, they're going through all this turmoil, and, you know, are we doing what we should be doing and whatnot. So it was a pretty challenging chapter to read. I think I, like, paused for a bit to just, like, process it and be like, I did not realize being a hunter or huntress could be so consuming, like, mentally, physically. I'm sure, you know, you got to keep up your aura. You know, you're relying on your semblance, you're relying on your teammates, you know, you're just practically strangers who know how to fight, and you're just, like, you know, you're trying to protect people, like, that's your overall goal. So it makes it a bit tough. But also, too, I almost feel like it's good that they had this chapter. One, we kind of know what's now going on within Volume 2, but also it kind of, like, reflects back to, you know, now they're thinking more, like, more strategic and whatnot. You know, they're working together a bit more, versus when, you know, that whole chapter that seems so scary and dark. Like, it's like they were just like, we don't know what we're doing. What do we do? Do we save people? Like, this kind of thing. And now it's like, hey, like, we got a plan now. We're going to do this. You know, two of us are going to go over here and do that. So it makes it almost like a good reflection piece of just, like, how far that team's come. Not only that, but also for, like, you know, other teams in the future, like Team RWBY or Team Juniper, like, you know, hey, like, they might have stumbled here, but look how far they're gonna come together. Something that was very interesting that I was not expecting was the sand tortoise. I really want to see a picture of that, like, your graphic or something, because, you know, when I think of a tortoise, I think of a little tiny turtle and whatnot, usually by the ocean. When they said a sand tortoise, maybe I need to go look it up or something like that, but I'm just wondering, like, how big it was, because they, like, put people on top of it, like, saving people. So that was just something that came as a surprise. Like, they were like, oh, like, this thing's alive, and it's like, oh, what is it? It's like, it's a tortoise. A tortoise? Like, what is going on? Fox's story was another sad surprise. I knew, I think I remember reading somewhere before I read this book that he was an orphan, and I was just like, oh, like, you know, maybe his parents, you know, passed away in, like, bandit or something. But the fact that, you know, he wanted to help, like, his parents build a house or something. His parents were like, no, like, you can't help us and stuff. So he went and he tried to make his own, like, away from the village and stuff. And when he came back, the village had swallowed, like, the earth had opened up and swallowed, like, the whole settlement and stuff. I was like, dang, that is something. You know, I was going to say something to see, but Fox is blind, so it's kind of hard. That was not a very good pun. But yeah, so, but something that stood out to me was a brief process in Vacuo. Okay, so it was after grief. So what bothered Fox most was that their deaths had been random, impersonal, meaningless, and they had been powerless to do anything about it. So Fox had vowed to leave Vacuo one day and live someplace where he could protect people who couldn't protect themselves, and at least then he'd have a fighting chance to survive. So I thought that was, like, really motivational. Be like, you know, oh, like, here out in the desert, it's just random, you know, it's a meaningless death, and now I'm gonna go to places where people just can't defend themselves no matter what. Alrighty, so some of you may remember in Volume 3, when Team Coffee comes back during the Vital Festival, and, you know, there's, like, students greeting them and whatnot, Velvet gets called aside by Professor Ozpin. This is, like, kind of like a little behind-the-scenes thing, and, you know, they're talking about, like, what happened, you know, what failed during that mission when, you know, Team Coffee was in Vale with Professor Port and everything, and basically, I just remember reading it, and it was like, you know, her teammates come rushing in, they're like, it's not her fault, like, you know, we're all in this and stuff, and then they end in a group hug, which felt really nice, and just really glad that they were able to do that all together. So back to the present moment of Team Coffee fighting in a sandstorm, getting people on a sand tortoise, trying to fight off Grim. Just your average day as a huntress or hunter. You know, there's a part where Velvet needed, like, powerful weapons, strong weapons, and she uses one of her former classmates' weapons, and even says, like, goodbye, like, whispers goodbye to them, like, as she uses the weapons, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, you don't realize just, like, how many casualties there were in Beacon, like, all the students and whatnot. So I know eventually if Team RWBY decides to go back to, like, Beacon and everything, just how hard that's gonna be for, like, all of them to remember, like, oh, I remember this classmate, or this is where we studied and stuff, and it's like, I'm not ready for that. Not at all, but we'll get there when we get there. And just as the book is wrapping up and, you know, people are safe and whatnot, you know, there's another flashback scene of when Glenda, so this is after the fall of Beacon, you know, Glenda is giving Team Coffee, like, their letter of recommendation to go to Vacuo, to Shade Academy and whatnot. So, you know, Glenda makes this whole speech about, you know, Beacon Academy's not a place, like, you are Beacon and whatnot. You know, it's, like, very, very good speech. Good job, Glenda. And whatnot. She says, now get out of here. And then you flip the page, literally a page later, and you find out, like, Team Coffee, like, some members are trying not to cry, you know, like, I think one of them was trying to pretend like something wasn't in their eye, so, but Yatsu was the one that, like, took me off guard, and this is when I was, like, reading in one of the hotel rooms and stuff, and it was, like, because he was trying to, like, instead of, like, hearing her voice, trying to hear Professor Ozpin's voice, and I was like, no. That's a little too powerful. So the fact that, you know, that she's, like, telling them, like, you know, you are Beacon, you are that light in the darkness that comes and to save people, to defeat the darkness and whatnot. So it was just trying not to cry. It was really a challenge, but it was so well done. I really enjoyed it. Wrapping up the last couple points, so we have Coco is stuck inside a blind worm. That would be another art piece I would enjoy seeing. But apparently, instead of being like gobbled up by the Grimm, she's like still alive, like on the insides, which they did a really good job writing that out, because I could like feel it. It was really, really gross. So, but she manages to get out. Velvet gives her a helping hand. Coco's out of the blind worm. She lost her hat. Don't lose my hat. But you know, they see the blind worm like escape. So it's one of the few Grimm that I've noticed that have actually like escaped. Most of them get defeated, but this one managed to bury itself in a hole. And I think it's true in the real world, like not the RWBY world, but in the real world, like if you cut a worm in half, it'll like grow into another part or something. I don't know, something like that. But so will that piece grow into another blind worm? Yatsu asked. Fox nodded. I take it back. That was a terrible plan. Velvet pouted. It was like, aw, like they didn't quite defeat the blind worm like they hoped to, but hopefully from that experience they'll learn a bit more and maybe train so that way no more blind worms can be in the making. And then towards the end of the book, as Team Coffee's headed back and whatnot, they spy another team, and it's Team Sun. So it was really, really interesting to see that they're going to come back into play. I mean, I guess that would make sense because towards the end of towards the beginning of Volume 6, when Sun and Blake split up, Sun was going back to Vacuo to train with his team and whatnot. So I was really excited to see that, and just like, you know, the little happy ending. So, and that pretty much concludes all of my reactions and thoughts about what was going on. So just thank you for taking the time to watching. I will be planning on reading Before the Dawn, so that's the next book, and that's mostly, I think, going to focus on like Team Sun and whatnot. So it'd be interesting to see like their team's perspective and see who I grow close to, because I feel like I'm definitely a little bit closer to each Team Coffee player or team member. Sorry. So, you know, I'll definitely try to read that as soon as possible and get another review out there. And if you haven't before, you know, check me out on my socials, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Jen.Cosplays45, because I actually did a photo shoot, as I mentioned earlier, as Coco Adele in the desert. That was hot. The photos, well worth it. So that's what really matters. So hope everyone stays safe, take care, take your meds, eat a snack, drink some water, wear your mask, you know, do one kind thing for yourself, and as always, be kind to others and be kind to yourself. Bye!